I believe that the essence of life is creativity, is expression of continuous unfolding of creativity. And when I say creativity, I mean it's the pure experience of play as a creativity, not necessarily associate with productivity.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Cheng. Spring is a mentor and guide for inner transformation. Her work integrates the philosophy of the Tao with artistic expression, scientific inquiry, and psychospiritual healing. She is passionate about empowering people to birth a culture that celebrates interconnectedness, harmony, and beauty. Spring spent the first half of her life in traditional pre-industrialized China and the latter half in the United States. She received a doctoral degree in molecular biology and a master's in acupuncture. She founded the Living Resonance Leadership MA PhD program at Ubiquity University and teaches in both English and Chinese. Spring connects with the indigenous spirit of China through ancient poetry, singing, and qigong Tai Chi. In 2023, 10 of her songs composed over ancient Chinese poetry were featured in the documentary movie Dancing with the Dead. Spring is the author of Resonance Code, empowering leaders to evolve towards wholeness. Hi, Spring.
Hi, Broderick.
I am very excited to have this conversation with you. You have quite the background there, and I suspect that a lot of that will be unpacked as we explore your ideas of what it means to live well, what it means to live a good life. So I know I just gave that introduction, but I also like for people to introduce themselves because that tends to have a little bit of a different flavor than just reading a bio, which is important. I think there's value in that, but I think it's also important for you to express yourself, how you feel about who you are in this moment.
Great question. Who am I in this moment? If I want to use one word to kind of approximate the essence that animates me, I would say it's spontaneity. I'm a very spontaneous person. I improvise my way through life. That's why I got all these different facets in my resume. Yeah.
So I like that. It's simple, huh?
So I do wear lots of hats, in order to live in the world. But at the core, I feel I'm just play. I really love play, creative play. That's creative, spontaneous play. That's kind of my mode of operation.
I love it. I love it. I resonate with that quite as well because I am have a whole lot of different things that I'm interested in and things that motivate me, and it is like play
Yeah,
exploration of
yeah,
various possibilities.
yeah.
So I'm sure we'll unpack a little bit more who you are throughout this conversation. But let's start from the beginning. What does living well mean to you?
Yeah, to come to this podcast, I saw the question you sent, and I actually thought about. I think I want to capture it in four words. Creative play. That's one of the things we talk about. That's the first, and second is service. To be of service, and the third one I would say is connection and belonging. A sense of
Mm,
connection, belonging with a place, with community, relationship. And the last one will be some kind of contemplative practice container that allow us to have a self-reflection process. So those are the four ingredients that I thought of.
So how do those four ingredients reflect, or how do they come together to make a life well lived?
I think I believe that we are the essence of life is creativity, is expression of continuous unfolding of creativity. And when I say creativity, I mean it's the pure experience of play as a creativity, not necessarily associate with productivity. It may, but it may not. Often, when we are being creative, it can be in a place that's not coupled with productivity. In my experience, when I'm in the flow of creative play, I have vitality. I have a sense of being connected with life larger than myself. So, so that's the first layer, is to be with that essence of life. And because we are social beings, we are, living in a human life. My creativity actually ultimately actually enhance itself or being reflected back by the people I serve. Like, how do I take my creativity to serve people? In my specific case, it my creativity recently has taken on the shape of my teaching, my work in the world, and also my music. And when I offer them as a service to the world, there's a kind of a positive feedback loop that happens. And do you want me to keep talking about the
Yeah.
other two?
Oh yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
sure. And the sense of connection of belonging, to me, it feels like it's the source of nourishment. And the creativity I feel in my life, I feel it's a gift from life. It's almost something I'm stewarding. It's not. I don't identify as a possession of mine. And to steward this, I benefited so much from friends, family around me. So this sense of connection, belonging, and also in my life, I also felt this sense of connection to something bigger than my life, like outside of my limited life space, specifically to the traditions lineage that I came from, the Taoist tradition, that feels like connect me to space time beyond my life, and that has been my infinite source of creativity and inspiration. So the last one, the some kind of contemplative practice for self-reflection, self-awareness. I think it's just so much a fabric of my life. I have to take a pause to in order to talk about it. Yeah, I think the contemplative practice of self-awareness, self-reflection, it really gives me a sense of agency, of sovereignty, that to understand and deeply understand and see that I participate, partake in the unfolding of my own life, and that puts me at ease. That I'm part of the sovereign agency in whatever whatever, however life unfolds, it's not always easy or happy. In fact, often, life presents many challenges, pain and grief. And even I think with the self-awareness, self-content practice, even in those difficult moments, there is a sense of acceptance and ease. And that's for me is a very important ingredient of living well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I hope to unpack a little bit more of this as we go along because I think you said a lot there that we can dig into a little bit more.
Hmm.
I like how you share that creativity extends out of this. The term that I would use is beingness, this the ultimate nature of reality, creativity bubbles up from there,
Hmm.
and you're like a vehicle. I think we are like vehicles
Hmm.
that allow that bubbling up from the ground of being. I mean, again, I'm using words that you may not use, but
I like
um,
that ground of
from
being.
the
Yeah.
from this ground of being, from this express, that there's something that triggers some type of agency,
Hmm.
something that initiates this bubbling up, and we get to be vehicles for that. And I really love how you said that it's not so much about you, it's not
Hmm.
about us as individuals,
Hmm.
where this creative spark enlivens us. It's something greater than Broderick or
Yeah.
Spring that comes forward, and it
Yeah.
allows us to bring to life something greater than ourselves, that allows us to open ourselves up to others, connect with others. I love that you relate this to your service, and how this creative spark, this ability, this capacity. And I think contemplative practice facilitates this, allows us to, helps us connect with this ground of being, this source,
Hmm.
that allows this bubbling up to take place within us so that we can ultimately serve and serve others from that place versus serving merely from Broderick or Spring, but from something richer and deeper
Hmm.
that Broderick and Spring can overly excessively constrain.
Yeah.
I just think that's wonderful, and I think, again, I'm interpreting a little bit what you're saying here,
Go
and
ahead.
how belonging and community relates to that, and that we're all are an expression of that.
Hmm.
And when we allow that to illuminate through us, we feel a greater sense of belonging and
Hmm.
connectedness with each other in the process.
Yeah.
Is
Well
that
said.
how does that?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. So in these conversations, I like to kind of bounce off of what you're saying, and kind of interpret what you're saying through a lens that I see the world through, and hopefully, as listeners listening to this, that you're doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Is taking the words that you're hearing, and trying to make sense out of it in your own way,
Hmm.
and hopefully that allows you to reflect on what living well is all about, what the good is all about. I don't think there's no one way,
Hmm.
but I think there are many different ways of articulating it, but we can find some common themes within all of these different ways of expressing it.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Spring, I know we're going to come back to some of those ideas, but I want to get to a place because you've mentioned Taoism quite a few times,
Hmm.
and I am a very big fan of Taoist philosophy, at least from the Tao Te Ching, and
Yeah.
how that is like a major influence on my way of thinking and seeing the world. And
Wow.
I know it's
Beautiful.
a limited view. I have a very limited,
Yes.
uh, I don't know how to read it in Mandarin or Chinese. So, but
Mhm.
I know that it influences and impacts my life so much.
Mhm.
So, where did these ideas come from? Your perspective, your take on living well, or Tao's thought, etc. So, can you say a little
Mhm.
bit more about your
So
background?
yeah, maybe I'll start with a story, because as the kind of my exposure to how does my exposure to the Tao starts. So I was I was born in China in the 70s, and it was at a time when I would say it's almost like a dark age of our traditional culture. It was at a time for a variety of historical, political, social, political force reason, that the the culture that I am a part of has really kind of cut their ties with the traditional lineage. So I was actually growing up, the indoctrination that has been added has been kind of applied to us at the time, was that our traditional culture were backwards, unscientific. In fact, there was even term to call Taoism the toxic grass. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So the polarity is very vivid here. Here we're talking about the living well, and the I some of the most intense memory of my life started with not well. It's a deep trauma, collective trauma. Like my grandpa, my father's side's grandpa, he was a Chinese medicine doctor. He's a folk medicine doctor all his life. At the Cultural Revolution, all his books and the medical supplies and the tools were burned
Mm.
in fear of being prosecuted. So it was really intense, and so I did not receive Taoism teaching in a kind of the traditional, or the way is gone. The visible way is gone in our culture. But what happened is that I was very, very sick child. Um, I think I was always, I have, I'm of my constitution has some sensitivity, and I was definitely sensing a lot of the grief and the trauma in my field. And I was constantly sick. I visit hospital all the time. And when I was 11, I had meningitis and almost died.
Mm.
And my father, the son of the Chinese medicine doctor, he he was very worried about me, and and I think he was just trying different things out. And one day he said, "I want to take you to a qigong teacher." So at that time, qigong was on the fringe. It was not kind of like it's on the borderline between legitimate and illegitimate. So this qigong teacher taught in a park. He doesn't even charge. He couldn't charge. There's no, it's there's no way for him to charge people. So it's just something people gather together and do. And I started learning qigong, and oh my gosh, it changed my life. I mean, it literally saved my life.
Mm.
Before that point, I felt like living, not just live. I mean, living well is like impossible. Just living itself is difficult. I did not
Mm.
know how to survive in this body with all the sensitivity. But when I started practicing qigong, it's almost like I find a switch in my body turned on. I felt I was plugged in the socket of some kind, and
Mm.
life energy started to pour into me. And within 3 months, my constitution has completely shifted, and it set me on a path trying to understand what is this thing, what is this chi energy, what is Tao, how come it's so powerful in my body, and yet the culture around me is condemning it and or devalue it. What's going on? So that kind of like become the initiated my life on this path, trying to make sense all of that. Um, yeah.
Mm. So you have that, and the reason why I ask this is because, I think we have the background, we have the foundation uh, that spurs our ultimate viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And those experiences, those past experiences kind of shape and mold us. And you were
Yeah.
sharing a, rather traumatic experience, meningitis. That's pretty dangerous, folks.
Yeah,
No,
and in the 80s, there are not much medical conditions, and I have to actually take a bus to go to hospital.
oh
And
wow,
yeah, well,
yeah.
hardly could walk. Yeah.
Very interesting. It's very interesting that your grandfather was a traditional Chinese medical practitioner and he had to, like, unfortunately burn all of his material just for his own safety. And how ultimately the thing that really helped you is tied to that traditional culture.
Hmm.
And how that experience of finding wellness through that practice kind of sparked your interest in Taoism, Qi, and
Hmm.
these various concepts.
Yeah.
Um, can you, and I want to ask you a few more questions about some of the other things that kind of motivated and inspired you. Can
Hmm.
you say a little bit more? You don't have to go into a whole lot of details, but for the audience who may be like, what the hell is Qi? What the hell is Tao?
Hmm.
Can you say a little bit more about what Qi is and what you mean by Qi and what Tao is?
So, qi is this concept to describe in the Chinese cosmology that um, all of life is one. All of life is one body, and it's the life energy that infuse and animate all life, that can be cultivated and felt in our own body,
Mm-hmm.
so that we feel this connectedness. It's not just the concept, but the actual literal felt sense of connection with the living beings around us. And it's a concept that, even though it carries maybe different term in different language and tradition, but you can find a comparable concept in many traditional indigenous cultures around this cosmic life energy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Qi is like this animating force, this animating energy that animates the totality of
Yes.
things.
Yes.
I think I have this yogic experience background for me, and
Yes.
I really resonate with the term prana. And
Yes.
I mean, of
Exactly.
course, there are different traditions say slightly different things about prana, but this
Hmm.
animating force, this animating energy, this elan vital in the Western tradition, that there's something that illuminates, that animates, that
Yes.
provides, that gives this energy. For me, I think it's the foundation of agency.
Hmm. Yes.
That gives that spark. When we talked about earlier, that
The create.
I think
Yes.
it's, yeah, the creativity is chi. Chi brings to life, causes disturbance in the waters that creates the waves that are each one of
Hmm.
us.
Yeah.
Chi,
Hmm.
to me, that's the way I look at
Yeah.
things like the vital force, one may
Yes.
say.
Yes.
And how about Tao? What
The
is
Tao,
Tao?
yeah. So Tao, so the particular Chinese kind of pathway into this universal life energy, let's say call it Qi as a universal life energy, is to say there are two aspects of this energy, the Yang and the Yin. The Yang is, what we just talked about, the active principle, the spark, the initiating, igniting, that aspect of the energy. And there's also the yin, which is the storing, restorative, quiet and stillness, synchronizing aspect of the energy. And it's by cultivating both of these. So they are, they can be opposite. They in reality, in nature, they can be complementary to each other. How, for example, in our body, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous activities, upregulate and downregulate our level of activity. We wake up and sleep. We be active and rest, restore. We intake food and digest. So there are all these complementary for the yin and the yang manifested in many different ways of complementary activities. So the Tao is just the study of how oppositions, how polarities complement, transform, and regulate each other. Yeah.
And can you say that, would it be correct to say that that Tao is like an essence? It's like a flow. It's like could it be that like the analogy of the ocean and that I was using,
Mhm.
and this universal energy causes the waves to come up, and could we say that the probably not though, I don't know, but could we say that the ocean is like the Tao or something similar to that?
I'd say similar. The Tao in its native language literally means the way, the path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and the path is going up and, sometimes goes to peak, sometimes coming to the valley.
Yeah.
Imagine a mountain path. And if it's more lively, fluid, then it's kind of like a ocean wave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I'm again I want to kind of unpack this a little bit is because I know I've already had a conversation with someone who is of Chinese heritage,
Hmm.
and he also brought up some of these concepts and ideas and how
Hmm.
that has influenced his way of thinking.
Hmm.
And I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of unpack it a little bit more because I think it's rich and super important for those of us in the Western world to kind of get a little exposure to these ideas from different cultural
Hmm.
spaces that can contribute to the concept, that idea of what a good life can mean.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
Giving
Yeah.
us some more linguistic tools, I think they're important
Yeah.
ways of framing reality and looking at things,
Yeah.
and I think that we we sell ourselves short when we don't take the opportunity to try to learn from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this background that you're in. Speaking of that, this resistance during the Cultural Revolution to those traditional values.
Hmm.
How did you find your way to Taoist these ideas and Qi and these things? How did you find your way back to that? I know subsequent of that experience that you had, that healing experience that you had with qigong.
Hmm.
How did that come about in terms of you leaving China, coming to the United States, getting a PhD in molecular biology, and then coming back to
Yeah.
acupuncture? So,
Right.
so how did that? If as much as you would like to share, because I think that will, I don't know, as a listener to your story, I
Hmm.
think that there's something important there that
Hmm.
that happened that has informed your view of what the good life is.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Yeah. Well, it's a long journey, and
A little bit more.
actually, I wrote a biography, memoir in Chinese, though it's not in English, about this journey, and it's like 300,000 words, something like that. So, but I'll um, try to make it concise here. So, but it's interesting. We talk about Tao and the yin and the yang and ocean flow. So it's interesting that my journey kind of embodies that a little bit. It takes me to get a PhD, come to United States, actually to come back to the idea of Tao. So, and all the time I was living in China, nobody talked about Tao, and
Wow.
yeah, and nobody. I had no idea what the yin and the yang meant. At least because I was brought up by my parents who are scientists, and so in that generation, that field of people, they are very very much is about science and the scientific way of understanding the world. But in my case, I think that period of getting PhD, coming to the United States, is just a young person, a young woman trying to figure out the world. My heart was not there, to be honest. But I felt that was my best choice at the time. And also I thought I'm also curious about what the world is. Even though I had my really just the essential experience of healing through qigong, and there's no cognitive way for me to understand it, and at the same time, I'm also curious about the rest of the world that ignored qigong. It's like, what is that? I want to also experience that too.
Mm-hmm.
So that led me to United States, and just because I had this opportunity and I got a scholarship and got a PhD, and one thing led to another. I actually was successful, very successful. Compared to where I started with, I was a upper middle class. Um, I worked at a pharmaceutical company, earned pretty hefty salary, and had the American dream and my house, cars, and actually several houses, stuff like that. Landlord and being a landlord and all that. But my heart was not happy.
Mm-hmm.
Those were choices made not out of my own full will. um, so I was not happy. I felt very unfulfilled. I felt actually very anxious, like a high level of anxiety, because something else was calling me very strongly, and that calling has led me to pursue extreme sport. What do you call it? Does it call extreme sports? I forgot that term.
Yeah, extreme sports.
Rock climbing, high altitude expedition. I was seeking adrenaline rush,
Mm-hmm.
almost addicted to that. and But that pursuit took me to Tibet, and I climbed a 20,000-foot mountain in Tibet. But my travel in Tibet has opened something in me. Just being in a place where the tradition and the indigenous culture was still alive has so much like awakened something in me. At that time, I didn't even know what that was. I just knew a part of me was unfrozen from a. It's almost like I feel like a river was a frozen river was melting, and so I spent a lot of time in Tibet doing. I eventually started doing pilgrimage, visiting their sacred mountains, and also being around with Tibetan people. The culture that's still, the still steeped in the indigenous way of living has really brought me back to a origin point, a home in me that I longed for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that let's see. So that's kind of the first part of the answer to your question.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
well, continue if you don't
Continue.
mind.
Okay. What happened next is another kind of a twist of something more dramatic. Is that, however, that pristine environment, that pristine kind of. I also want to say that I don't want to romanticize that, because that way of living is very harsh too.
Mm-hmm.
The places I visited that has still kept the indigenous way of living. It's beautiful. It's very one with nature, and it's also harsh. You are completely exposed to element, and without the medical conditioning, medical and education, medical condition and education. The access to education, and then of course all these modern amenity is almost non-existent. And I also witnessed what happened when people started to introduce kind of modern mindset into that place where I visited. Very soon, it's like it takes thousands of years to grow a forest, but it only take one day to bulldozer them off. So
Mhm.
so that I realized there's something very beautiful held in the indigenous culture. At the same time, it's very vulnerable vulnerable to the destructive power of our time. So I'm very much wanted to understand how to embody that oneness, that wholeness with nature in a more resilient way. And another thing happened contributed to that is that because of my identity as a Chinese, and I don't want to get in too much of detail because it's very complex, but there is a pretty intense geopolitical conflict between Chinese and Tibetan cultures. And I think this, our whole world is caught up in a chain of propagating a materialistic culture, and the Chinese is Chinese culture is part of that propagation too, and and so as the kind of pusher for the modern value, for the materialistic value into the Tibetan culture, there's this pretty dramatic conflict that happened, and I felt so in my heart. I felt this connection, deep connection with both my Chinese heritage and also the Tibetan land and the culture that has awakened my soul. So 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 when that conflict happened, I felt so much grief and pain to a degree I could no longer held my comfortable luxurious life as a just going along with the dominant culture. So I kind of stepped out of the currents of this dominant culture, quit my job, and in fact held a I started my first social entrepreneur experiment is in Seattle, where I was living at the time. So this geopolitical conflict actually eventually spread to United States to affected the Chinese and the Tibetan community that in Seattle, living in Seattle. So my first social entrepreneur experiment was that I organized a effort to bring Chinese, Westerner, and Tibetan people all together in a container to listen to each other's story and facilitate, so we can facilitate some healing and mediation in that container. So that started, that stepping out of the kind of status quo dominant current has kicked off a whole slew of chain reaction that eventually put me into acupuncture school and then the path that led me to where I am now. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just think that's so important because we're telling a story here. We're
Mm-hmm.
having this conversation and you're offering some background to your story. But that background is so important. I think you said so many things there that that a listener such as myself listening to that can learn so much from. So there's so much to reflect on.
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing up ideas that has affected the entire globe. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
That this materialistic, physicalist way of looking at the world, that we can ultimately reduce the world into quantities, what we can
Yes.
count,
Mm-hmm.
material things,
Yes.
that ultimately becomes very abstract, as we can see in
Mm-hmm.
contemporary physics.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a problem that happens when you have a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
The old ways can get, like you said, it could take 1,000 years to grow a forest. I really like that. And it
Mm-hmm.
only takes a day to bulldoze it down.
Mm-hmm.
And when that conflict arises, a lot of times we throw the baby out the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
It's cliche is used quite often, but I think it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
That there are some benefits to the materialistic perspective, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
Look at modern medicine. Now, of course, modern medicine is not perfect at all, but there are quite a few benefits that are gained from that. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't get rid of tradition, say for instance, traditional Chinese medicine,
Mm-hmm.
or for that matter, some of the traditional Western medicine ideas.
Yes.
Yes, you don't want to be bloodletting people all the time, like in the Western world. If just
Yes.
somebody's sick, you don't want to be bleeding people to death. Of
Mm-hmm.
course not. We're not saying keeping that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to update these
Yes.
ideas, but you don't want to throw everything away. And when we collapse and reduce everything to physical objects, and that's it, and not even just physical objects, but the way that we describe, the language we use to describe these physical objects. And then we conflate that language, this map that we've created, the models that we created for the real thing. And then we live in this abstract world detached away from the natural world around us.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of what you're speaking to speaks to that, and that conflict that happens. I'm glad you brought the idea of in Tibet, the beauty, the wonder of the nature there,
Mm-hmm.
and that experience that it had on you. Yet
Mm-hmm.
you were able to see that the harshness of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
How can we have a world where we can enjoy that beauty and what it does for us to be in those spaces that we a lot of times we refer to as sacred spaces?
Mm-hmm.
How do we integrate the
Yes.
ideas from this abstract concepts associated with the material world? How do we integrate that into the beauty, the grand beauty of nature, and the impact, the influence that it has on us? And I
Yeah.
think that it's hard for people to do that, for us to do that, as we can see through history, all over the world, even in Europe as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
How this conflict that arises when these materialistic concepts of the world
Mm-hmm.
uh, or dominates
Yes.
the other worldviews that have been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they're not perfect, because I do believe in evolution. Things evolve,
Right.
and but how do we include those aspects
Mm-hmm.
of that world into the contemporary world? And I think that's a lot of the work that we're doing.
Yes.
And you mentioned that in a way, I feel, through the story that you just told. How can you integrate
Yes.
that experience in Tibet with nature, with your modern contemporary mathematical way of looking at the world?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then also you said something else that's really important and rich, without going into all the details of the complicated details of the
Mm-hmm.
Tibetan Chinese
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
How is it possible for us to integrate ideas?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this project that you did
Mm-hmm.
is similar to what I'm trying to do here.
Mm.
How do we sit down and have a conversation with each other
Right. Mm-hmm.
and share ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm tailoring this conversation to what is your take on what it means to live a good life,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to help unpack how you've come to see that,
Mm-hmm.
and also give the audience, give myself
Mm-hmm.
um, some more ideas about how to look at the world and how to look at what it means to live in a world and to live well in a world with other human beings. And I
Yeah.
think it's important that we do have these conversations, even though they may be challenging conversations, particularly in the Tibetan Chinese
Yes.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
can imagine how challenging that conversation is.
Yeah.
But I really respect you for doing that. And
Mm.
I think that, applaud you rather. I really applaud you for doing that, because I think it's such an important thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Things start with conversations,
Mm-hmm.
because we live by stories.
Yeah.
The materialistic view of the world is a story.
Yeah.
The animated view of the world is a story.
Right.
And if we don't share and have conversations with each other about our stories, how are we going to integrate them?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to get integration. You're going to get what happened with the Chinese Revolution.
Yeah.
Similar things happen all over the world. In
Yeah.
certain places now, it happened in Europe as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Is you have a new view, and that new view says that, oh, all the other stuff is crazy, and we got to get rid of it,
Yeah.
and we're going to shut it down completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think there's so much that is lost in the process of doing that. And what tends to happen to a lot of us who have an intuitive feeling that something is missing is the experience that you had.
Mm-hmm.
You went, you got the PhD, you're living the American dream, you have the stuff, and then there's a certain level of, I know you didn't say this word, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a certain emptiness
Mm-hmm.
that you're experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
that you need, you wanted to, you long for something different, and then here you go to Tibet and you go out and it's nature.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been, but I've seen images. I can only imagine
Yeah.
the bigness, the beauty
Yeah.
of that. Was like, hold on for a minute. I like my stuff, but there's something else here that has touched me richly and
Yeah.
deeply,
Yeah.
and it has awakened something inside of me
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately inspired me to come back and give up all those, that materialistic way, not give it up completely, of course, but to give up certain
Yeah.
aspects of that material life to
Yeah.
pursue something that helped me heal. I
Yeah.
don't know, many years ago when I was a kid. I just think that's an important thing to, for us as listeners to your story, to reflect on and see how that can inform us about our own story and the
Mm.
path that we've taken, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it does. Thanks for packing, unpacking, digesting, and integrating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So so today when you think about, I know you mentioned those four components of the living well for you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned certain few words about peace. I think you've mentioned stillness, belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit more? What does it feel like? I like to go to the not tangible, but this
Mm-hmm.
felt sense
Mm-hmm.
of living well, and how has your history, your story informed what that felt sense of living well is, if
Mm.
that's even possible to do.
Mm. Um, would it be helpful if I like share some my most cherished moments of my current life where I feel it's like that's I have a good life. Is
Yeah,
that what you?
absolutely.
Uh,
Well, that would be great because that's a practical example.
um, for example, I love Tai Chi class. I teach Tai Chi in the town that I'm part of, Bellingham, where I'm living.
Mm,
And, here I am. I'm a teacher. I'm working, but it doesn't feel work at all. I mean, there is some work to get people, there is some work involved, but just to do Tai Chi together with people in a community, to share that space of slow, flowy movement, it just feels like so we're nourishing each other through our being. We're nourishing
mm,
each other as we settle down into this space. It just feels so intimate, you know, so intimate, so nourishing. It helps so much. Like I know, like my health, my vitality is very. That's a practice that keeps my health and vitality in a very demanding world, and I feel very grateful. I not only can do that myself, but also with my community. Um, so that's one aspect. Is that what you're? Does that is that what you're looking for? Is
oh, I'm open. I'm looking for whatever comes out of your mouth.
Yeah,
So I'm not real. I'm pretty open,
yeah,
but I think that that touches on those four pieces that you mentioned.
yeah, yeah.
Like tapping into that flow. I'm gonna use the word flow for now. That
Mm-hmm.
tapping into that richer space in
Mm-hmm.
community with others, that interconnectedness that you speak of,
Yeah,
and the sense of belonging in a community, being with other people,
yeah.
serving. You're serving by offering this practice that has been beneficial for your life,
Mm-hmm.
and you're seeing how it influences and impacts others.
Yeah,
Yes, it's work, it's energy that you're putting in,
yeah,
but it's also
yeah,
enriching in your life in that way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also contemplative. It's in Tai Chi class we we're training our awareness of our body in
Mm,
relationship to the space and in relationship to different body parts learn to coordinate with each other. and
Mm-hmm.
there's such a sense of pleasure. It's very pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
You practice yoga and other kind of martial arts. I love to be, I'm also a dancer, and I
Mm-hmm.
incorporate the Tai Chi movement with dancing. Um, you know, part of me, there's a selfish part of me. I could just be happy dancing all day.
I know, right?
Yeah. That's like my most native state of being is just have a hut close to a river, close to a mountain, and just dance all day and grow my own food. Then I'll be happy. But that's my utopia. That's
Right. I know.
yeah. Um, it's also a privilege. It's what I just described was also a life of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
If that were to happen, it's some kind
Mm-hmm.
of ideal. But to really use my body well is very pleasurable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now you brought into creativity with dance into your qigong, and so your four principles it keeps popping up,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it shows up, and
Yeah.
also you said something that sometimes it depends. It depends on certain if you get into the traditions, certain meditative contemplative traditions that kind of push aside pleasure.
Mhm.
Because we live in a world that can be excessively hedonistic or
Yes.
excessively engaged in pleasure, the sense of feeling good from
Yeah.
physical pleasure, and that can be problematic when
Yes.
that's what our primary focus is.
Yes.
But it's also important to also recognize that yeah, it feels good. Living
Yes.
good is also pleasurable, folks.
Yes. Yes.
There's nothing wrong with pleasure in its proper context.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all
Uh,
about context.
that's the
Pleasure in
context.
right context is a very uplifting, transcendent pleasure, not the kind of
Exactly.
pleasure, not the indulgent kind of pleasure. Yeah.
Exactly. And we can use an example based on the example that you use about pleasure. You get pleasure out of teaching your Qigong class.
Yes. Yeah. Hmm.
But here's the thing you're also serving,
Yes. Right.
you're also supporting others and then trying to, doing
Yeah.
your best to offer a service to enhance
Well-being.
their well-being
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
a contemplative practice that also is pleasurable,
Yeah.
that it can enhance the
Yeah.
well-being of yourself and
And when
others.
I say pleasurable, it's actually literally, I felt like there's a sweetness, there's a light
Mm-hmm.
flavored, very subtle sweetness in my body. It's almost like some, hormone is being produced. It's very subtle, but it's very real for me in my body. Yeah.
Awesome. I agree with you because I'm definitely into physical practice and movement and song and music and all those things. And
Oh, yeah.
yes, there's
Mhm.
a sweetness, right?
Yes.
There's a
Yes.
sweetness to living well. So this
Yes.
is what I was getting at when I was asking you about what does it feel like? Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's this pleasurable, there's this sweetness
Yeah.
in the life of a person who lives
Yeah.
well.
It's like
Living well is
I'm producing, it's not like I intake sugar. In fact, I
right.
don't like sugar at all, but my body produces sweetness. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So I know I just threw that in, and I know we're coming to a close in a few minutes here, but I know I threw in this. You've mentioned the importance of music in your life, and also in that bio I read that you've produced some music here, and I also read on your website that you came to music a little bit later in life.
Oh, yes.
Can you say a little bit more about music in the life of living well and pleasure? You can put in the context of pleasure if you like, however you want to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't start to learn music until I was 41 years old. And prior to that, I had almost no exposure to music. For me, the music is an extension of my dance. And the way I'm taught, I have this teacher, Kaya, I'm really grateful of. She did not like try to have this top down kind of, she did. I never learned to read music. The way I learned is to listen to the music intrinsic in my being and translate
Hmm.
that into songs and into piano, into instrument, and uh, I was taught in a very unconventional way, very organic, very spontaneous. I learned to develop a relationship with my piano, then see that as an extension of my being, my body, and then dance with it. So yeah, and then since in last 10 years, music has been a very crucial aspect of my joy making, pleasure making in life. I sing my way through basically. My song leads my path of creativity. When it attuned me to my vision, my inspiration. It also, I sing songs to heal me. When life always throw obstacles, and I will, yeah, and the past trauma will be triggered, and I have lots of songs that come to heal me.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that, how music kind of bubbles, it's part of that bubbling up of creativity
yeah,
and how we all have the capacity for music. One can argue, one way of looking at things is that we're all in a vibration of music.
totally.
And if when we
Yes,
tap into it, when we listen to it, we can learn how to express it
yeah,
and bring that into the world.
yeah,
Because I think for me, music beyond just reading music and just rotely remembering music and hitting notes without ever actually feeling into that music
hmm,
how it comes out of you. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that way
hmm,
of learning music
yes,
or anything like that,
hmm,
but particularly when you learn music the way you did, and I've learned music that way as well,
mm,
is to listen, to
hmm,
tap into that space inside of you and see can you feel the rhythm inside of you, see can you feel the melody inside of you. Don't worry
yeah,
about no damn notes. I mean,
yeah,
seriously.
yeah,
That doesn't make music, real music. Well, who we can argue all day which tradition, do we
yeah,
take, the which scale do we use, which sounds do we use.
yeah,
They're different, and I think we all have it inside of us. And when
yes,
we tap into music, dance as well, I feel movement. When we tap into creative, um, we're listening to the movement of the Tao in a way. I don't know if
right.
that's even a correct way of
Yes,
saying
that's
that, but
lovely. I love that. Yeah.
and when we do that, we're tapping into something greater than ourselves.
Yes,
And I think that, I mean, again, I'm interpreting a little bit of what you're saying here. This
I
is
love it.
Broderick saying here, and that when we extend beyond ourselves and allow ourselves to be a vehicle of goodness in the world,
Hmm,
we can experience that pleasure of it. We can experience the sweetness of it,
hmm,
of giving and serving and being a light unto the world through our artistic expression, our creative expression, be
hmm,
it through music, through movement, whatever art form that one chooses to allow themselves to or open themselves up to.
yeah,
I think that there's something to celebrate
yeah,
about in life when we have that opportunity to
hmm,
tap into that artistic space, that creative space,
yeah,
because it gives us something
yeah,
um, that's pleasurable, that's beneficial, that feels good, but also it gives us something, an opportunity to extend
hmm,
beyond ourselves, beyond our concepts. Just like being in Tibet and being in those mountains and getting blown away
yeah,
by a feeling
yeah.
that I can imagine. Was that feeling pleasurable? By the way, when you were in Tibet and being in
Oh, it's
exposing,
incredible. It's so
right,
many different feelings,
right,
as well as hard. You got to climb.
yeah, for sure. I can
not,
imagine.
not enough oxygen, but even the hardness is part of the sweetness.
Ah, look at we throwing that in at the end.
Yeah,
Exactly.
when
Yeah.
you cook, you don't just add sugar. You got to add some salt and
Hmm.
sometimes some bitterness that make the
Exactly.
flavor very rich.
It makes the flavor rich, and it's also that bitterness helps you digest that food. So
Yeah, right.
you gotta have a little bitter to digest the experience,
Totally.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all of it. I think that we can live a good life, live well, and have all aspects of those, I guess, those emotional qualities,
Yes.
those
Yeah. We need all
experiences
emotional qualities.
can
Yeah.
be a part of it, and it's just how we integrate all of that stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah, this has been great, Spring. I think that there's so many things to explore and to unpack, but we have an hour. I try to
Yeah.
stick to that more or less. I hope that yeah, that we can continue to have these conversations.
I would
But
love.
I do want to ask one final question before we go. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with? Any final thoughts? I mean, it could be anything,
Mhm.
anything that you would like to leave the audience with.
Um, I think maybe just the um tail, riding on the tail of the last thing we talked about. I just remember when I first met my music teacher, there's this part of me so couldn't believe I could sing, that I could
Mm,
make music, and um, and yet there's a part of me so much wanted to, and I just want to say, don't let anyone tell you you're not creative. You are. We are creative. Sometimes we can get swindled by this materialistic world to think, oh, we have to make songs certain way or fit certain criteria. Yeah, that block our creativity. So
hmm.
um, I'm a living proof that that's not real. Wait. Yeah.
Awesome.
Wait. Mhm.
Well, thank you for such a lovely conversation. Oh man, I just have so many questions and really look forward to talking with you more. It's a pleasure to meet you
Yes.
and get to know you in this fashion through this conversation. And maybe we can have you come back at some point to kind of unpack a little bit of your work and share
Sure.
your work
Hmm.
with us and talk about how your work
Hmm.
informs
Hmm.
this view
Hmm.
of the good life. Yeah, this has been wonderful, and I really do look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you. It's been such a joy, pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.